Hey everybody, BTO Pro here, EdTechJoker, whatever you want to call it. So I got something doing something weird today. Beyond it, the webcam. I sort of did this on purpose, but I had a presentation that I gave 5 years ago that was called "This is 2020," the session. It closed out Drupal Camp PA, which was an event I was doing. It wasn't supposed to be like the closing thing, but we ran out of time slots as far as sessions to allocate, and it just happened to be like kind of a closing keynote. So I never recorded it at the time, kind of on purpose. I'm going to record it now, and I want to see how it plays. I'm going to just go through and give this presentation the way that I probably did 5 years ago, which was my prediction of where we would be in 2020 as a result of automation. Some of this is just going to be like, oh, neat, and if you've followed anything we've done, maybe it'll be moderately interesting to you. Otherwise, people will skip this first minute and go right to whatever the heck this talk is. So enjoy. I know I will, because I'm going to get to experience it as well. The year is 2020, the session. This was originally closing notes at Drupal Camp PA. So you get an interesting window into what I was thinking 5 years ago. Bear in mind, what I'm going to show you I was talking about is the reason our team is able to pursue hacks. This is very early Elms Learning Network stuff, and my projection of where we would be, the types of projects we would be able to tackle as a result of this automation and raw capability that has still yet to be replicated. So, I am BTO Pro. I'm the head of the Elms Learning Network project, which 5 years ago was just barely a thing, and now it's a very different landscape. Our group is no longer called the E-Learning Institute. I work at the Office of Digital Learning in the College of Arts and Architecture, still here. And so this talk is more or less stemming from a single thing that I noticed one day on my job. I was refactoring some distributions in Drupal and kind of our processes for the way we worked. And I realized that my job literally wouldn't be possible without Travis CI. Now, Travis CI is an automation engine. It just basically tests things and gives you like a code quality report. But I had never used one before. And I realized we were reaching a level where I couldn't really do the project and sustain anything interesting without the use of robots. I really need to work on interesting things. And so it was just not going to cut it to solely be working on Drupal modules at that time, even distributions of Drupal, which were bundles of projects together. So if you want to learn more about Elms Learning Network, you can go to elmsln.org. That address is still viable. And if you've heard of it, but you're not really sure what the impact is, and again, this was at a Drupal event, the Elms initiative at this time and the contributions towards it, it's hundreds of modules. But those projects have been downloaded, again at the time, 827,000 times with more than 13,000 reported installs. Those numbers are up over 1.5 million easily as far as downloads, and it's much higher on reported installs because of a few projects that really took off after this talk. So the impact of Elms on Drupal is significant. I have a few core commits as a result of working on this project tangentially related to Drupal. But the real impact at the time of Drupal on Elms was immense as well, because it wouldn't be possible the type of architecture we're going for at that time without Drupal. So there was a quote by someone that really struck me. I was really hung up on it, particularly at this time in my life. And it's, I think there's great value in perfecting technologies that set out to eliminate the webmaster, the developer, and the designer. And let me tell you, I love being at a technology conference and talking about the notion of eliminating the positions of the people in the room I'm currently speaking to. There's something infinitely meta about an automation system that replaces those who are driving society forward. And this quote, as I reveal, is by Dries Boytaert in 2007. He wrote this a very long time ago. At this point, at that point in time, that would have been like eight years. Now we're going on 13. And he wrote about this in the fact that Drupal was at that time eliminating middlemen from the process as far as it's doing a lot of advanced automation. And no longer do people have to, go in and set up MySQL databases and create tables by hand, that sort of a thing. So looking at this, like I've taken this quote and I've ran with it really. That was 2007. I remember experiencing that. I just started my career. This was the project that I was working on at that time. This is more or less what I was paid to do. This is why I was originally hired, is I kind of envisioned this way that we could structure content online with a tool that we called Course Designer. At the time, we later rebranded as Outline Designer, and as since it's been put on the archive. It's still used by hundreds of courses at the university, but active development has shifted over to Hacks since then. But it was a big deal because it allowed people to organize content dynamically and do it in a way that had really, at the time, again, we're talking 2008, high user experience. So this is 11 years ago that I had made this. And we do this primarily for the delivery of online course websites. But because that's what I was supposed to do, like I was hired to do that for a course. And because my focus has always been on automation, and because Drupal was such an advanced platform at the time, I was able to kind of organically build out from that and start having massive shifts in the amount of things that I had automated as a result of the toolsets I was building on top of. So at that time, Drupal's much further ahead than anything else that really existed. We've got a slim UX layer on top of it that makes it a little bit easier to use. But I didn't stop there. That was 2008, right? That we built that. So what we started to have emerge is the ability to have higher orders of magnitude of automation. Automation that could then structure multiple distributions. We're skipping a step there. We would go from a module configuration in a Drupal site to multiple Drupal sites and being able to manage it and maintain it, to an installation profile that actually is then able to do the same thing as that, to then a distribution automating an install profile, to then being able to stand up an entire infrastructure as a sustainable thing in an intentional way. So that, if you imagine that each one of these is an online course, we could actually have all this coupled functionality within that online course, and that a very small team would be able to support a lot of functionality because of this automation and raw power of Drupal and Drush, to be perfectly honest, at the time. To what I was saying at this time would be the next step. So that we had these colleges around the university, and honestly, this is at the time why I didn't record this originally, that we had these units at the university that were all more or less doing the same thing as far as delivering online courses and in delivering these experiences through content management systems, through web-driven systems, but that they were all basically doing the same thing. And the reason they were doing the same thing is because of the uniqueness and robustness of each college, that the material had to be different. And those systems had to be at least slightly different, maybe presented differently. A statistics engine has access to a lot of different statistical applications that the Arts College is never going to care about. And the Arts College has the online art studio, which is something that, scientists might not necessarily care about, et cetera. So what I was projecting is, it had been 6 years to that point that they're talking about this and this automation built. What would it be like 6 years forward from there? Which I then said, why wait? Let's just build another university. And so I won't do this now. I don't even know if that script will run. I haven't touched this in forever. But I just went and I copy and pasted this script that's below here into a terminal window and hit go. So imagine I did that. Because ultimately, all I want to be in this world is a barista. Who wants to be a developer? Knowing that your job is going to be outpaced by automation tomorrow, that it's going to be gobbled up and you're going to have to constantly try to keep up with what's changes are coming in society from a technological perspective. So the more important question than what do you want to be when you grow up is, what are you doing now? Why? Why are you doing what you're doing now? Because I'll be honest, you need to start looking at the people around you and say, who makes who irrelevant in this equation? We're in a room full of people of all different job classifications that involve the web and the web stack. But I assure you that automation is coming and it's going to disrupt this process. Web developers, designers, sysadmins, system architects, people that click the buttons, project managers. DevOps is coming to eat into each and every one of these roles. And yes, they will still have a place, but every few years they're going to have to transform to keep pace with what's coming in the nature of automation. So let's take a step back from that. Man, that's a really dark, mundane topic. Let's go forward towards society, right? Because this web stuff, it's really hard, but like everything is awesome in the rest of the world, and yet oddly everyone is unhappy about it. Now, without getting super philosophical, we can boil this down to why I think this is the case. And this is me 5 years ago, but my God, it's still absolutely true now. Is in the future, we're boiling our existence down to digital connections. And this is a good thing. We've got all these additional connections. We can reach out and talk to people in real time. We can talk to the other side of the globe. And if we're able to talk to the other side of the globe, there's a good chance that's going to increase tolerance and increase the connectivity between people, because it's one thing to hate, like a warring faction tribe in the Middle Ages because like that's their kingdom over there. Oh, they're the bad guys, and we're over here, we're the best. But when I can actually like reach out and talk to them instantly and see like, oh, they're just like normal people like me. Like hopefully this increased connections and connectivity will lead to greater tolerance. And technology is increasingly cheaper, faster, more usable, more accessible. More and more people can get involved in that. And so hopefully more and more people will become increasingly more and more tolerant. Better world, utopia, all that fun stuff. But definitely, that's a two-edged sword here, because we're boiling existence down to these digital connections, or at least we have the risk of doing so that it would become less about meeting new people and more about, I can meet anyone, who cares? And so facts about people being disconnected from each other and our need to seek meaning in meaningless connections, we might think that we're going to have more meaning, but actually we end up feeling really empty and like nothing matters. An example of this, right, is that, we can make more connections. We're going to have better products and everything's great. You can have your iPad, which makes your life better so long as you're a consumer always. That these technology companies have the ability to shape these decisions in ways that we don't even always realize. That, if we're going to be connected all the time, they have an awful lot more power than they did previously when we occasionally would go to the computer to use it. So couple that with the idea of making sure that we do the same or more with the same resources. Let's couple that with people's, just overall enjoyment of government and how well things work. It's really high, right? It's really, really high. We have a lot of confidence, at least in the US, in the way that our system of government works. Governments globally are kind of on this same downward trend, but don't worry, because costs of things have plummeted, right? Like, cell phones are cheaper. I think if we go low enough, what is it down there? Oh, toys are cheap. Thank goodness. Toys are cheap. So we've got that going for us. And phones and accessories and computers are cheap, and televisions are through the floor. That sure hasn't changed in 5 years. But another thing that hasn't changed in 5 years is that wonderful little trend line up of the cost of college tuition and fees going through the roof. So we're starting to arrive at the area where we have this wonderful order of society that's existed for hundreds of years at times. But if we've got all this hyperconnectivity, if we've got people always in touch with each other, technology constantly eating into the landscape of what's possible and how many people you need to do it, all of these connections, that eventually can lead to what's known as a singularity. If you're not familiar with a singularity, maybe you've heard of the singularity, a Ray Kurzweil term, but effectively a singularity is a mathematical an impossibility. Like, you don't know what's going to happen once you hit this certain point. And we're kind of in that swing. And this is what, Kurzweil points to as far as like, okay, well, we're going to hit this point where we'll basically get to transhumanism because of an uptick in machine intelligence, and that machines will become infinitely more intelligent than people. And I personally don't believe that, but I think that the automation chipping away at our human connections over and over again is going to take these structures and kind of start to crumble our institutions and organizations if we're not careful. And a funny quote I saw leading up to this from Cal Evans, he's a developer, was managers, if you call your people resources, they get to call you overhead. Ingrain that in your memory. And it's not about cheapening and boiling things down to just that, but at some level, if you refer to your people as resources, you are dehumanizing. And there is kind of this notion that as things get more and more efficient and people are able to self-organize, you don't need quite as much management. Boiling that down to a Drupal concept, like, you don't need as many roles in this, because again, we were at a Drupal event. And so the critical thing that this did, really, for the web is the fact that, it's able to have this cascading, collapsing effect, right? So I could check these boxes and give people the ability to just do their own thing. If you want to edit the boxes on your website, I just give you the permission and you don't talk to me anymore. So I really see tech as being able to collapse these control structures. All right, if we have containerization via things like Docker, we can then build these cloud providers, and cloud providers can be built in a way that let people service their own needs. If we get from cloud we can have cloud providers and system virtualization locally. At the time, this is, then revising what this talk is, Vagrant VirtualBox has certainly lost this war. If I were to, rewrite this in real time, it'd be much more that virtual networks sit on top of containers which form cloud providers because of DevOps. And then this is only going to get infinitely more complicated because of RESTful communications and webhooks. But let's stop and look at that wonderful little blue drop that everybody loves to hate. That's, if we think about it not as a technology and instead as a cost, that is a multi-million-dollar piece of code and code base as far as hours put into it that you get for free. So all of these things, we view them through the lens of automation and abstraction, views, rules, features, the coder modules, Drush, Drupal console at the time is being discussed. These are things that are critical pieces of automation that then eliminate whole sections of what it takes to make a website. All right, so we're virtualizing everything. We view Drupal as this, thing that can virtualize stuff. So we did this fun little breakout of what it is to visualize Elm's learning network from a code perspective, and just like playing around with data visualizations. And you have this picture where you have all these different concentric layers, so much of which are completely repurposable and can be run in other contexts. And increasingly, and what I was trying to demonstrate at that time, is a lot of it's non-Drupal. And especially now, if you would look at what we're doing, because we've since moved towards web components from what we were doing here, it's even more way more non-Drupal. We've moved almost entirely away from Drupal. So then I'm going to talk about running our infrastructure on DigitalOcean server by just copying and pasting a line, how we were able to use automation to replicate sites that already existed and then eliminate the need to then rebuild the site. As well as just like everything going on with different CLIs, command line interfaces in the Drupal universe. So, and then pointed to the university schema, this idea that if you could collect enough of what the requirements were and you had enough automation scripts, you could basically just set up whole institutions of your own. And so then I would go to show this window into what this is. And this just makes me so happy with where the project was at this time. So, we had this theoretical course example, right? And the course had, this center point that things connected to that would broker us to the rest of our institutional universe. And then we would send people off to these different web services for their experiences, and they wouldn't know they were going to them, but they basically would be going to them as different appliances. So our our course interface looked like this at the time. It's funny, it's highly readable, I guess. And then, it would work on mobile. It was a big deal to say like, hey, this would work mobile, and you could share things, right? So there's a little share charm. And then by clicking the share charm, it would effectively give you tokens, and those tokens would allow you to embed and remix the content you're reviewing in any number of formats. We still have capabilities like this. We don't surface them in the UI quite like this, obviously, and they're better, much better visualized. Hacks has since blown up this whole creation methodology. But that led me into talking about DevOps a bit and our experience with DevOps, because I'd written a thing called Drush recipes, and Drush recipes was our way of chain automating Drush and giving logic to the way that whole chains of execution in Drush were run. Now, Drush is a command line automation thing in Drupal, so the idea is you could actually start to build these recipe books that then would just set up everything for you. And that if you had enough DevOps intelligence and enough of these little handshakes and packaging files, that you could start to more or less set up everything that you were doing previously by hand. Now, this is pretty obvious by now. It probably was at that point too. It was 2015, but now you're not going to start a project without some plan about how you automate that whole process. And you see these mega companies that have popped up since then, built on the backs of these automation libraries. So what I was demonstrating, and this was actually a whole conference talk at one point, going back in history, is that we would have a user engage with one system. The user is someone that works at our organization. They still use this, actually. This automation still runs. We just used it to set up this semester. And that they would say, okay, well, we're offering a new course this semester. They would actually fill out a form indicating what systems they want it to use. Each of those systems would stamp a Drush recipe automation script onto the server, and each of those would then generate a new Drupal site on the fly, which would then be networked together via organically automated RESTful web services, which, is not a real phrase. It's just something I made up. But effectively, these sites would be self-aware. They would set themselves up. They would know that, oh, hey, I'm part of this network that is this course, and they could have fluid conversations with all the other parts of themselves, basically. So that then, theoretically, you could swap this one out with a Drupal 8, and you could swap this out with Drupal 9. This one was static HTML, and you'd have these little pieces of an ecosystem that could be, popped on and off. So we do this, we were doing this in practice with a lot of automation, and some of this workflow automation would get involved with Drupal, Slack, GitHub. Wow, that's a horrible, I don't even remember what that one is. So it's some Drupal logo. Vagrant, Travis CI, and Jenkins. And so if we were to visualize that, like what is going on with most tasks in my life now, it no longer involves me writing code, at this point. It involves me setting up these workflows that kick off chain automation to just do everything on my behalf. So then I stepped through what's actually going on here, right? That I make a commit, that these systems on GitHub talk to Travis and they actually test these commits. And then if things work out after they've been done locally, that these automation processes ensure that there's a level of code quality to report back to Slack to tell me, hey, this is safe, we can go ahead and run this, which I can then push to an internal GitHub repository while simultaneously, and this was a big deal, this is a concept we leverage all the time now, something I call pipeline unification, but that your development process as, me, the developer, pushing out a commit, I'm pushing one out, but yet it's being leveraged by two completely disconnected systems as far as what's being visualized in this picture. That we have code that we need to run in Elms, but we also want it to be able to run as its own standalone thing. We leverage this all the time, this concept with our web component architecture now, that I build code towards Hack CMS, and it's automatically things that would work in Elms, in Drupal, in WordPress, in Backdrop. So we've kind of taken this and run with it even further conceptually. So then I push code to an internal mirror of our GitHub repo. And meanwhile, there's this wonderful little Jenkins bot. And Jenkins is sitting over here doing some automated security routines, backing things up every few days, and then pushing out the updates from itself to all these different deployments of Elms Learning Network. And not all of these exist anymore. This one exists, this exists, this exists, this one exists. So we dropped 3 since then. But just the idea that we could have a pipeline by which I'm updating hundreds of Drupal sites without ever touching them as a result of this automation layer that we would put in place was pretty cool. Similarly, we could also run singular commands at Jenkins, and Jenkins would go execute them on our behalf, giving us the ability to control a lot more parts of the process. But again, because everything was set up using these scripts, we knew exactly how it was built. And I'm nowhere near like a cloud architect that would run these for mega companies, but like this is something that allowed our project to be able to have a lot of stuff just happen, or happen once and deploy everywhere, kind of a thing. And again, this was 5-6 years ago. So I go that route with hey, we'll eventually get to a point where someone wants to have a new one, and because we've had this whole templated process for building these, someone can come and request their own Elms instance, and it'll just stamp itself out. And that never materialized, unfortunately. But with what we'll announce in July, it won't need to because of a new service that we've built that rolls out in July. So then I ask, who's doing my job? If someone had a script, they have a form and they fill it out and it sets things up, and I'm still just working on my project, but now I'm actually able to support and maintain hundreds of instances. Where'd all the me's go? Who's doing my job? Do we need to hire people to maintain that stuff? Because we're not getting into just workflow at that point, right? Like going back to this who automates who, I'm saying the DevOps person is the highest point of control in the entire organization. Because if you have that process down correctly, if you have that type of a workflow in place, you've had scripts mirroring the human process, you won't need the humans anymore in this equation, right? So this then gets towards the philosophy side, because if we have the ability to effectively remix processes based on what task needs to be done, and we're not focused completely on just building these huge tech teams to solve some societal challenge, it becomes a lot more important what our philosophy is and our ability to understand how we impact and change it, which I then played this video.
When you grow up, you tend to get told that the world is the way it is, and your life is just to live your life inside the world, try not to bash into the walls too much, try to have a nice family life, have fun, save a little money. That's a very limited life. Life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact, and that is everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And you can change it, you can influence it, you can build your own things that other people can use. Once you learn that, you'll never be the same again.
Once you learn that, you'll never be the same again. Yeah, I certainly haven't been the same. That is for sure. So I talked about some of my information theories at the time. Again, why this wasn't recorded, because of how long it took me to get my master's out, because of it was kind of controversial at the time. I basically laid out 2 theories that really influenced my thinking around why I build things the way I build them. One is technological determinism. It's effectively a reductionist theory saying that society is, pretty much going to be built based on whatever its technology is, right? So, yes, there is some back and forth as far as these shaping things, but you wouldn't make society the same today as you would 10,000 years ago as a result of the smartphone and just all the other things that we take for granted nowadays. Actor network theory would say is kind of more expressing the understanding of how we get between those worlds. Not the 10,000 year leap, but that there is this brokering of society saying, hey, we're going to change in this way, so we generate a technology. That technology then goes out into the world, is used in a way that's fundamentally different from how it was conceived, or maybe even it is how it was conceived, and that turns around and has the ability to influence and impact society, and that there's this cyclical approach. It's a very fluid network of things influencing things. So by using these two theories and actually actively applying them, I named a theory of my research, or title of my research, Information Altruism. It was the idea of how I was able to get Drupal to spread at the university, which was that it wasn't that the technology existed, that didn't matter. It's that I was then able to use that technology, going to other organizations and teaching them how to use that technology for free. That was the thing that made it flow like water, or that the drop keeps on rolling. And so that I said that basically there's a value system other than money that is established, and if you can establish that, you can change the culture of an organization. So the university was very anti-open source. Again, we're talking like 10 years ago. They weren't really big on Drupal. But then because of evangelism and advocacy, I was able to basically get people to adopt something because they had someone to talk to and say, like, am I doing it right? And as a result of that, and that not being a financially motivated thing, people start to move towards this solution, which was the better solution at the time, but people weren't going to move towards it because there was just that financial-based currency that was a blocker. So then, I talked about a little bit about what was in that research. It's a pretty long paper. You could read it if you want. But then I talk about another thing I call structured anarchy, which I just kind of throw it in there. But really now looking at it in retrospect, this is stuff that influences my discussion of like organic static site generators, fractal design patterns, just that there's ways that you can build things that go out into the world and set themselves up, that they have a life of their own, but yet they can still be maintained by small bunches of people because of the way at which they're set in motion, that there appears to be anarchy in the way things are rolled out, but that there is an underlying structure that, standards that make everything okay. And what is amazing to me, because again, I haven't looked at this in 5 years, is that I then get into talking about activism, which for someone who now calls himself a developer activist, it is kind of fun to see 5 years ago that this is how I got into this, really, as far as being comfortable talking about these things. And talked about, actual, not that it wasn't actual, in the streets activism, but that you can have digital forms of activism, that we need to be able to seek lower technology costs for education, creating a more accessible internet, and fostering, different initiatives, data transparency, that these things were a form of activism because markets were not going to just arbitrarily do them on their own. They didn't have an incentive to do so. And so I said that code is not just code. Code forms systems of control that drive the patterns by which society is dictated. And we need that control at some level. If we have a chaotic situation here, we don't have the right controls in place, all these cars will crash into one another, and they still have places they need to go. So we do need some level of control, but it can't be hypervigilant. It can't be, what we were talking about at the time, Facebook manipulating the emotions of people for a science project. Because no one knows that that's the road. Once the road is there, you no longer see it as the road. It's just the path to go on. And we have an incredible responsibility as people that build these systems and roll them out, as far as how we use people's data, where we allow it to flow. Hey, Snowden was big, right around then too. It's kind of fun to see. And this was also stuff that included my research, things about Facebook and Twitter as platforms being used to help augment the Arab Spring. It said, what will you be doing in till 2020. Right? Look where the puck is going. See where tech is heading. Keep learning. No, we can't all keep up, and that's all okay. But we do need to avoid extinction. March in a common direction that spans sectors and job classifications. 5 to 10 years, 50%. It's just it's amazing, me then pointing to this, what we did with this 5-year swing, because honestly, the move to web components is in part because of that idea that these things have to keep moving forward, and you have to span and network and get out and get between industries if you're ever going to survive in the long term while still being innovative. It's funny. It's funny to see my own words, the way that I was thinking about this in the past, reflected now, especially, with Hacks Camp being a few months ago, that a lot of the message of Hacks Camp was around uniting and working across these silos, so that we can move forward and have a better common humanity together, but also, all the activist stuff mixed in that I talk about now. So, you need to live full stack, is I believe where I left off. You don't know which of these is going to put the other one out of a job, but logically, you're going to need to be pretty low in the development stack so you can solve other problems to keep from issues popping up above, which are usually in the form of waste or just like lots of people doing tasks that can't be automated. So leverage community, work between the lines, because products are ephemeral and movements are eternal, a phrase that I still love saying even today. Realize that with great power comes great responsibility. And that one I really like, that anything sufficiently advanced, or any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Certainly have noticed that with my class of students that I have now. I wasn't teaching 5 years ago. Working with reckless abandon. Don't fear being fired. It's funny, just little slides. Web and Drupal jobs are incredibly profitable. Now I feel like I should give this talk in my class. You can program the robot dogs, or they will program you. I don't remember what that context was, but what will you be doing in 2020? At which point I then show the output of the script, because it did take at the time like 30, 40 minutes to run. And it actually would then go set up and automatically network dozens of Drupal sites together, registering domains and all that fun stuff, and say like, okay, we built our own university, now what are we gonna do? So I hope you found this interesting. I held off of recording this at the time, knowing that I would want to do something like this and put it up. So hope thought it was interesting. I thought it was interesting to see, everybody on our team makes fun of me. I've been talking about 2020 for 5 years, and it's because of that session. So here's to the next 5. You little activist, you.